Special delivery. Oh, this thing weighs like 40 pounds. If you can't already tell, this is a Dell Alienware PC from several years ago. Look, I'm gonna be real with you. I'm not the biggest fan of Alienware. This one, I have opinions about it. Right out of the gate, it is the most unorthodox shape you could ever have for a PC. This side panel here, when it's removed, reveals a bunch of weirdness. So pretty much everything. Raymond's doing the splits. Raymond, are you okay? You okay? I thought you were about to rip your pants. You wanna gather yourself real quick?
I'm good.
Okay.
I'm good.
Okay. I'll take it from here, I guess. So yeah, everything's slanted at like a 30-degree angle. You okay? The power splice slanted. The platform. I know you can't really see the motherboard in there. It's all just turned like this, which some of you sickos out there might actually like that. Jokes aside, this is actually a pretty interesting pre-build. I imagine it wasn't on most of your radar at the time this was popular because many of you build your own PCs, and I respect that. But some folks ended up buying these, and I want to know what all the fuss was about, if this was actually worth buying in the day, and how it performs in this day and age. Are you ready? Stay with me. If you're planning your next PC build, then consider checking out our sponsor, VIP SCD Key. Their Windows 10 and 11 OEM keys sell for a fraction of retail and will unlock the full potential of your OS. They'll also remove those pesky activation watermarks. Click the links below to get started today, and be sure to use our special offer code SKGS for a sweet discount on a variety of options, including Windows 10 and 11, Pro and Home, and more. Let's kick things off then with front I/O, which I think you'll find fairly generous. So starting first, we have an optical drive. I think it's a slim optical drive, if I'm not mistaken. We have non-unified headphone and microphone jacks. We have two USB, I think these are 3.0 ports, I'm pretty sure, Type A's, and a full-size SD card slot. Now on the motherboard side of things, it's okay back here. Several USB 2.0 ports, which is a reflection of this platform's age, several USB 3.0s down below, and that's really about it. No display out, which ties into what the CPU is in this motherboard. It's an Intel Core i7 5930K from X99. Now, before you grimace, and some of you are already doing that, this is actually a decent 6-core 12-thread chip. For the price we paid, I'm happy with this combination of hardware. Maybe not the graphics card, which we'll do something about a bit later, but the CPU isn't all that bad. And it's paired with 16 gigs of DDR4, albeit just a single stick. The questionable choice, though, in my opinion, was the inclusion of this 120mm AIO, actually with Dell Alienware branding on top it. I'm not sure this is enough pack-a-punch for a 5930K. Something else fairly interesting, this is an 80+ bronze power supply. It is a standard ATX form factor, and it's actually an 850-watt unit. 850-watt, 80+ bronze, not exactly the combination I was hoping for, but hey, it's also fully modular. We do have a second case fan angled this way toward the front. It's still really strange. And then we have a second case fan up top, also angled strangely. You can tell that we don't have any like side-by-side 120mm mounts, so you can't fit anything other than a 120mm AIO in here, which I suppose makes up a little bit for the inclusion of this, but it's still weird. It's like Alienware decided to just use a super compromising case design just because they wanted to, and sacrificed a ton in the way of hardware support. One form factor they did get right, though, pertains to graphics card support. You can see we have a GTX 970 in here now, which, well, is pretty lackluster in today's day and age, but you could fit a card much larger than this if you're willing to remove the bracket that supports this card. Now, there's an interesting backstory with this one, and I'm not entirely sure why we were seeing what we were seeing. But when I first received this, and it was packaged beautifully, by the way, I powered it on and went to check on my capture card for a post and a picture, and I wasn't getting one. But everything seemed fine. Internally, the graphics card was lighting up, the fans were spinning, the pump was working, and the AIO. I was at a bit of a loss. So the first thing I did was swap the graphics card out, because I assume it's such an old card, and it was being shipped and tossed around, I imagine, by UPS or FedEx, that it might have broken. Sure enough, putting a newer card in the rig resulted in a picture out. I said, dang, well that sucks. Like the 970, that was one of the things I was looking forward to testing in here, was seeing how relevant the 970 still is in 2024, which, spoiler, it's not very good. but you'll see that in a minute. I reached out to the seller after testing the graphics card in another rig and confirming that it was not working, and just asked him if he noticed anything like this before he shipped it out. He told me that it was verified working when he shipped it, but he offered very generously to either reimburse us the price of the card, would have been about 50 bucks or so, or replace the card with another he had on hand. I didn't end up taking him up on either of his offers. I'm not in this to try to get money back from it. And so that wasn't something I was gonna do to begin with, but I did think it was very nice of them to offer, and I'm gonna have their eBay seller account included in the video so you guys can see who they are, and I would 100% buy from them again, maybe just not at Alienware, which isn't their fault. But the card was just tossed to the side because I assumed, okay, well, this thing's just dead, I'll put something else in it anyway. Then I went to put it back in right before we started filming this video, and it started working out of the blue. So I unfortunately don't have an entire testing suite of games to show you with this combination of hardware, but I did run this quickly through 3D Mark Time Spy to gather that this system, as is, only scores better than about 9% of all submitted results. The playback wasn't very smooth. As you could imagine, we were heavily graphics card bottlenecked. It just wouldn't have been all that great a buy, as was for about 250 bucks, which was the offer that was accepted on eBay. But that's where this RTX 2080 Super comes into play. See, these are actually going on eBay for about $200 used, which I think is an incredible value for a card that supports DLSS and ray tracing and also packs a pretty decent punch in games. What will this do when combined with a 5930K from a decade ago? Go ahead and carefully pull this one out. Can we all just take a minute to appreciate how beautiful this RTX 2080 Super is from EVGA? They just don't make cards like they used to. And the fact that this is an EVGA card makes this sort of kind of nostalgic. In we go. Still a 2-slot card and uses an 8 and a 6 pin this time instead of an 8, instead of 2 6s. The good thing is though, we have the headroom at our disposal from this power supply, at least on paper, because it's an 850 watt. Not too shabby, subtle LEDs in the card, and now it's time to see how this system performs with the swap. Mind you, this card costing only about $200 to 250 bucks means this entire setup, if you had bought the exact same one we did on eBay, would put you in at around $500. That's pretty good. Now, in the comment section below, let me know what % you think this will score better than other results in 3D Mark Time Spy. Remember, we scored better than 9% of all submitted results with this whole thing before. How much better will we do now with a 2080 Super? You might be surprised by this, but our little system here scored better than 49% of all submitted results, putting us smack dab in the middle of all systems tested in this DX12 suite. Now, the CPU is still the limiting factor. It will be for a majority of titles you'll see us test in the future, but when you consider the price we paid for this sort of hybrid rig, I'm pretty impressed. Moving on then to actual games, starting first with GTA 5. This title came out around the same time this platform was popular, and well, at least for PC, I should say, so that's why I want to test it here, and you can see that in 1440p, high settings across the board with no anti-aliasing or advanced graphics, we're averaging over 100 FPS in the skies and about 100 FPS or so on the ground, although it does drop just below that when the scene gets especially intense. Notice though, all 12 of our CPU threads are sort of kind of chilling around 50 to 60% utilization, and that tells us that there's really no graphics card or CPU bottleneck here. The game is more or less being limited by optimization, which is a consequence of its age. Next up is Dirt 5, our rally title, still in 1440p and a high preset. You can see we're averaging around 100 FPS. Again, our CPU is kind of chilling around mid-40s to 50s overall. The graphics card is what's being especially stressed here, around 90 to 95% usage pretty consistently throughout this benchmark. Shadow of the Tomb Raider is one of our more intensive titles, still in 1440p high preset, but this time with the advantage of DLSS baked into the game and supported by our 2080 Super at very little visual loss. I don't think it would make sense to not turn this on if you had the ability to. That keeps our frame rate around 100 FPS on average in these scenes. You'll also notice in certain scenarios, as the scenes change, the GPU utilization will drop and CPU utilization will increase. This is where we'll start to hit that heavy CPU bottleneck. You can see our frame rate later on drops to about 70 to 75. Again, because our CPU is having to work harder, lower IPC, fewer cores than we'd ideally like in 2024. It's still pretty good though. Last up then, F123. Now this one I made an exception for. We tested it in 4K, also because it has DLSS baked in, and the balanced preset, I think this is also high 1440 1440p, you can see we're averaging still around 80 FPS, not too bad for the Australia wet benchmark. If you're looking for something closer to 100 or 120 FPS, 1440p and 1080p will definitely lighten the load on the graphics card and make our CPU work a bit harder. Though you might find, as we've discussed in previous videos like this, if your CPU is ultimately the bottleneck at lower resolutions, it might actually benefit you to run a game in a higher resolution than you otherwise would have in order to stress the graphics card more and alleviate some of the load on the CPU. All in all, I'm pretty impressed with the performance here for about $450 to $500. Although you can make the argument very easily that we don't really have much of an upgrade path and the power supply is a bit questionable, cooling is a bit questionable all around. We actually did monitor CPU temps throughout. I ran IDA64's stability test for about 30 minutes, and by the time the loop equalized, our CPU cores were still chilling at around 70 degrees Celsius, which is more than acceptable here. I thought it would be worse considering this is a 5930K from, again, nearly a decade ago, but it looks like Dell really wasn't pushing the boundary as much as I thought. Okay, so yeah, maybe there are several baked-in compromises here. I mean, it's a Dell Alienware after all. It's not something I would ever just go out and recommend, but if you want to just kind of have fun with something like this, I'm actually pretty surprised that this platform is doing as well as it is. And when you combine it with a semi-modern graphics card, you can actually get some pretty playable performance in modern titles and in respectable resolutions and in-game settings. Just make sure you replace the original graphics card. This is a must. You can't even really game in modern 1080p with a GTX 970 nowadays, let alone something higher or something newer. And in defense of this system, I'll leave you with one final thought. If you compare this to our $550 PC build from a couple videos ago, I'll have it linked below if you're interested. That system only scored better than about 21% of all submitted 3D Mark Time Spy results. This system scored better than 49%. So this is actually a much better gaming PC for $100 less. Does it have an upgrade path? No, not really. But the 5930K, I mean, is still a very capable CPU. And it's just something I wanted to leave you with because this performs a lot better than something that you could build new in most cases today with new hardware only. You can get a lot of value in the used market, like this pretty affordable RTX 2080 Super. It's crazy, these things cost about $200 used now. And this is so much card for $200. It's probably one of the best used graphics cards you could buy today. With that, I hope you've enjoyed watching this one. I know, be gentle, okay? I know a lot of you hate the shape, you hate Alienware and anything Dell does. I get it, to an extent I get it, but we can work with something like this, especially something like this because the platform is so good. And I do want to mention that we have something coming up in the pipeline. Actually, I think it's probably gonna come up next. The next video, we're going to completely gut this, like down to just bare chassis, and we're gonna put a proper modern rig inside of here. So if you hate this case as it is, you're gonna really hate the next one. So stay tuned for that one in the near future. If you haven't subscribed already, get subscribed, give us a thumbs up if you thought this one was cool, leave a comment down below, check out relevant links in the video description, and stay tuned for the next one. My name is Greg. Thanks for building with me.